In the quiet years after the Second World War, Washington, D.C. carried a different kind of tension. The war had ended in victory. Parades had filled streets. Soldiers had come home. But beneath the celebration, a new uncertainty was already taking shape. The world had changed. Empires had fallen. Europe lay in ruins. The Soviet Union, once an ally, now stood as a rival power. The atomic bomb had altered the meaning of war itself. For the first time in human history, entire cities could disappear in a single flash. American leaders understood something unsettling. The next conflict might not begin with marching armies or formal declarations. It might unfold quietly, through whispers, secrets, and influence, through alliances forged in private rooms, through information gathered in the shadows. During the war, the United States had relied on the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, a wartime intelligence service tasked with espionage and covert operations overseas. When the war ended, the OSS was dissolved. But the need for intelligence did not vanish with it. In 1947, under the National Security Act, a new agency was born, the Central Intelligence Agency. Its mandate was broad: collect intelligence, analyze threats, conduct operations that could not be openly acknowledged. It would answer to the President. It would operate largely out of public view. There would be no campaign medals, no televised briefings announcing its missions. Successes would often remain classified. Failures, when revealed, could echo for generations. From its headquarters in Langley, Virginia, the agency began building networks across continents. Case officers traveled under diplomatic cover. Analysts studied fragments of intercepted communications. Reports moved across secured desks, shaping decisions at the highest levels of government. The American people would rarely see these efforts, and that was by design, because some wars are never declared. Some battlefields are not marked on maps. They are fought in foreign capitals, in jungle clearings, in safe houses, and back rooms. They are fought with information, persuasion, and at times, quiet force. In the decades that followed its creation, the CIA would help topple governments, support insurgencies, and wage campaigns the public would only learn about years later. These were the agency's secret wars. And they would raise a question that still lingers today. In defending a democracy, how far can secrecy go? Before it begins to shape the very nation it is meant to protect? In the early 1950s, Iran stood at a crossroads. It was an ancient nation with deep cultural roots, rich in history and pride. But in the modern world of geopolitics, it was known for something else: oil. Oil that powered ships, factories, and entire economies. For decades, much of Iran's oil had been controlled by the British-owned Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. The arrangement brought significant profits to Britain, but many Iranians believed their country received far too little in return. Among those critics was a dignified, soft-spoken nationalist named Mohammad Mossadegh. In 1951, Mossadegh became Iran's prime minister. He was educated in Europe, admired democratic principles, and believed firmly that Iran should control its own natural resources. Soon after taking office, he nationalized the oil industry. To many Iranians, it was a moment of pride, a reclaiming of sovereignty. To Britain, it was a direct threat. The British government responded with economic sanctions and legal challenges. When negotiations failed, British officials began seeking help from a new partner in the emerging Cold War, the United States. In Washington, concerns were growing. The Soviet Union loomed just north of Iran's border. The fear was not simply about oil. It was about influence. If Iran became unstable, American officials worried it might drift toward Moscow. At first, the Truman administration was cautious. Mossadegh was not a communist. He had been democratically chosen. But instability was increasing. Economic pressure was mounting. Political protests filled the streets of Tehran. By 1953, Dwight Eisenhower was president. His administration took a harder line against perceived Soviet expansion. Within the CIA, a covert plan began to take shape. It was called Operation Ajax. The objective was clear: remove Mossadegh from power and strengthen the position of Iran's monarch, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The method would not involve American troops landing on Iranian shores. Instead, it would rely on persuasion, propaganda, and carefully orchestrated unrest. CIA officers worked closely with British intelligence. Money was funneled to influential politicians, military officers, and newspaper editors. Articles were planted in the press portraying Mossadegh as reckless, unstable, even sympathetic to communism. Crowds were organized. Demonstrations were encouraged. Tensions were quietly amplified. At first, the plan faltered. In August 1953, an initial attempt to dismiss Mossadegh through royal decree failed. The Shah, uncertain and frightened, fled the country. Mossadegh appeared to have survived the challenge. For a moment it seemed the operation had collapsed. But CIA operatives on the ground pressed forward. They regrouped. They increased funding to street organizers. They helped coordinate protests that appeared spontaneous but were carefully guided. Within days, Tehran descended into chaos. Clashes erupted between supporters and opponents of Mossadegh. Military units influenced by key officers aligned with the plan began shifting their allegiance. On August 19, 1953, Mossadegh's residence was attacked. He surrendered shortly thereafter. The Shah returned to Iran in triumph. From Washington's perspective, the operation was a success. A government seen as unstable had been replaced. A monarch viewed as pro-Western was restored to firm control. The Soviet Union had not gained a foothold. Inside the CIA, Operation Ajax became a model, proof that covert action could achieve strategic objectives without open warfare. It was discreet, efficient, relatively inexpensive, and largely invisible to the American public. For years, the United States did not officially acknowledge its role in the coup. But in Iran, the memory was vivid. The Shah consolidated power in the years that followed. With American support, he modernized parts of the country, expanding infrastructure, promoting education, strengthening the military. Yet his rule also became increasingly authoritarian. Political dissent was suppressed. Opposition groups were monitored by SAVAK, the Shah's secret police, trained in part with foreign assistance. Prisons filled with critics. To many Iranians, the events of 1953 did not fade into distant history. They became a symbol, a moment when an elected leader had been removed with outside help. For American policymakers in the 1950s, the decision had been framed in the stark language of the Cold War: better to intervene quietly. they believed, than to risk losing a strategically vital nation to Soviet influence. It was a calculation shaped by fear of expansion, fear of containment failing, fear of a domino effect across the Middle East. But history rarely confines itself to short-term outcomes. Over the next quarter century, resentment simmered beneath the surface of Iranian society. Opposition to the Shah grew steadily. In 1979, a revolution swept through the country. The Shah was overthrown. An Islamic republic emerged under Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Soon after, militants stormed the American embassy in Tehran, taking 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. The hostage crisis stunned the United States. For many Americans, it seemed sudden and inexplicable. But in Iran, 1953 had never been forgotten. Operation Ajax had been one of the CIA's first major covert interventions during the Cold War. At the time, it appeared to demonstrate the effectiveness of secret action. It strengthened confidence in covert tools. Yet it also revealed something deeper. When powerful nations intervene quietly in the political life of another country, the consequences may unfold over decades. The people who make the decisions may not be the ones who live long enough to see the aftermath. For the CIA, Iran was both a blueprint and a warning. A blueprint for how intelligence services could shape events behind the scenes. A warning that even successful operations can leave invisible fractures. Fractures that widen slowly. Fractures that may one day shift the balance of history. In Washington, the lesson many drew in 1953 was simple. Covert action works. In Tehran, the lesson was very different. And the distance between those two perspectives would shape relations between the two nations for generations. It was the agency's first major test in the arena of regime change. It would not be the last. In the early 1950s, far from the deserts of Iran, another nation stood at a turning point. Guatemala was small, agricultural, and largely rural. Its mountains were dotted with villages. Its economy depended heavily on coffee and bananas. And much of its most valuable land was owned not by Guatemalans, but by foreign corporations. One company in particular held extraordinary influence, the United Fruit Company. Headquartered in the United States, United Fruit controlled vast tracts of land in Guatemala, along with railroads and ports. It was one of the most powerful corporations in Central America. In Washington, it had friends in high places. But in 1951, Guatemala elected a new president. His name was Jacobo Benz. Benz was a former military officer who believed his country needed land reform. A small percentage of landowners controlled most of the farmland, while thousands of peasants had little or none. His plan was straightforward, at least on paper. Unused land owned by large estates would be redistributed to landless farmers. The government would compensate landowners based on the value they had declared for tax purposes. To many Guatemalans, this was an effort at modernization, an attempt to reduce poverty and strengthen democracy. To United Fruit, it was a threat. Large portions of the company's land were unused, but strategically held. When the government announced it would seize and redistribute some of that land, the compensation offered was based on tax valuations that the company itself had reported, figures far below market value. United Fruit protested vigorously. Meanwhile, in Washington, the Cold War climate intensified. The Korean War was underway. Senator Joseph McCarthy was warning of communist infiltration at home. Fear of Soviet expansion shaped nearly every foreign policy discussion. Within the Eisenhower administration, some officials believed that Arbenz' reforms were influenced by communist advisors. Though Guatemala was not a Soviet satellite, and Renz himself was not a declared communist, members of the Guatemalan Communist Party held advisory positions in his government. In the tense atmosphere of the early 1950s, that was enough to raise alarm. The CIA was tasked with evaluating the situation. Its conclusion was blunt if left unchecked. Guatemala might become a foothold for Soviet influence in the Western Hemisphere. And so, another covert operation began. This one was called Operation Peb-Sucks. The objective was to remove President Renz from power. As in Iran, the plan would rely not on American troops, but on covert influence. The CIA identified a Guatemalan exile named Carlos Castillo Armas, a military officer opposed to Renz. With CIA support, Castillo Armas would lead a small rebel force from neighboring Honduras. But the real weapon would be psychological. CIA planners understood that perception could be as powerful as force. They launched a radio station called The Voice of Liberation. It broadcast dramatic reports of rebel victories, exaggerating the strength and reach of the insurgency. Listeners inside Guatemala heard of advancing columns and widespread defections. Many of these reports were fiction. Meanwhile, the CIA supplied weapons and training to Castillo Armas forces. American pilots flew missions that bombed select targets, not large-scale destruction, but carefully chosen strikes designed to create fear and confusion. Inside Guatemala City, rumors spread rapidly. Was the army defecting? Were rebel forces larger than reported? Was the United States prepared to intervene directly? President Renz found himself increasingly isolated. Though Guatemala's military was larger and better equipped than Castillo Armas' small force, confidence began to erode. Some officers doubted the government's ability to withstand American pressure. Others feared being on the losing side. The power of perception was taking hold. In June 1954, as rebel forces advanced and air attacks continued, Renz made a decision. He resigned. In a radio address, he denounced foreign interference, but stepped down, hoping to prevent further bloodshed. Within days, Castillo Armas assumed control. From Washington's perspective, the operation had succeeded. A government perceived as leaning toward communism had been removed without open American invasion. The Western Hemisphere had been secured. The CIA viewed the operation as confirmation that covert psychological warfare could be decisive. But in Guatemala, the consequences were profound. Castillo Armas reversed land reforms. Political opposition was suppressed. Over time, democratic institutions weakened. In the years that followed, Guatemala would endure decades of instability, repression, and civil war. Human rights abuses became widespread. Tens of thousands lost their lives. For many Guatemalans, 1954 marked the beginning of a long and painful chapter. For the United States, it reinforced a doctrine. If a government in the Western Hemisphere appeared to drift toward communist influence, covert action was an acceptable tool. The success in Guatemala sent a message far beyond Central America. It demonstrated that the CIA was willing and able to shape political outcomes in sovereign nations. It also deepened a pattern: operations justified by strategic necessity, secrecy maintained in the name of national security, public silence even as private interventions reshaped foreign governments. At home, most Americans knew little of what had occurred. There were no headlines announcing the CIA's role. Official statements framed events as an internal uprising against a troubled leader. The details would emerge slowly over decades. But among policymakers, the lesson seemed clear. Covert action worked. Iran had restored a monarch friendly to the West. Guatemala had removed a government seen as drifting toward communism. 2 operations, 2 apparent victories. Yet beneath the surface, something else was unfolding. In Latin America, suspicion of American motives began to grow. The idea that the United States would intervene quietly, decisively, in the internal politics of smaller nations took root. Trust, once shaken, is not easily restored. And in the long arc of history, the memory of intervention can endure far longer than the operation itself. Guatemala was not a superpower. It was not a military giant. It was a small nation, caught in the gravitational pull of a global rivalry. But its story carried a larger message. The Cold War would not be confined to Europe or Asia. It would reach into jungles and villages, into economies and elections, into the private calculations of presidents and generals. And as the CIA's confidence grew, so too did the scale of its ambitions. The next tests would be even more complex, and the stakes even higher. By the late 1950s, the Cold War had moved closer to American shores. Only 90 miles from Florida lay the island of Cuba, a place long intertwined with American business, tourism, and strategic interests. For decades, Cuba had been governed by Fulgencio Batista, a military strongman whose regime was friendly to the United States. American companies operated freely there. Havana's hotels and nightclubs drew visitors from across the ocean. But beneath the surface, resentment was growing. Corruption was widespread. Wealth was unevenly distributed. Many Cubans lived in poverty while a small elite prospered. In 1959, a young revolutionary named Fidel Castro marched into Havana at the head of a rebel army. Castro promised reform. He spoke of sovereignty and justice. At first, Washington watched cautiously. It was not immediately clear whether he would align with the Soviet Union, but within months, Castro began nationalizing industries, including American-owned properties. Diplomatic relations deteriorated. Trade restrictions followed. By 1960, Cuba had drawn closer to Moscow. For American leaders, the prospect was alarming. A Soviet-aligned government just off the coast of Florida. It was one thing to compete with the Soviet Union in distant regions. It was another to face its influence so close to home. The CIA was tasked with finding a solution. The plan that emerged would become one of the most famous covert operations in American history. It began quietly. Cuban exiles, men who had fled Castro's revolution, were recruited and trained. Camps were established in Central America. The objective was to build a force capable of landing in Cuba and sparking an uprising against Castro's government. The agency believed that once the invasion began, the Cuban people would rise up in support. Castro's hold on power, they assumed, was not yet secure. The operation was conceived during the Eisenhower administration, but carried out under President John F. Kennedy, who took office in January 1961. The invasion site was chosen carefully, a remote stretch of coastline known as the Bay of Pigs. In April 1961, the operation moved forward. Before the landing, airstrikes were launched to weaken Cuba's small air force, but the strikes were limited, in part to maintain plausible deniability. The United States would not openly acknowledge its role. On April 17th, approximately 1,400 Cuban exiles landed at the Bay of Pigs. From the outset, problems emerged. The element of surprise had been compromised. Castro's forces were better prepared than anticipated. Local uprisings failed to materialize. Instead of a popular revolt, the invading force faced organized resistance. Within 3 days, it was over. Many of the exiles were killed or captured. The operation collapsed in full view of the world. For the CIA, it was a profound failure. For President Kennedy, it was a public humiliation early in his presidency. The Soviet Union watched closely. So did Fidel Castro. The failed invasion strengthened Castro's position. It confirmed his warnings that the United States sought to overthrow him. It pushed Cuba even closer to the Soviet Union, but the story did not end there. In the months that followed, the CIA continued efforts to remove Castro from power. Some of these efforts were bold. Others bordered on the improbable. There were plans to support internal resistance movements, attempts to sabotage infrastructure, even schemes later revealed that involved unconventional ideas to embarrass or eliminate Castro. Many of these operations remained classified for years. At the same time, tensions between Washington and Moscow intensified. In 1962, American reconnaissance aircraft made a startling discovery. The Soviet Union was installing nuclear missiles in Cuba. Suddenly, the Cold War was no longer an abstract contest of influence. It was a direct nuclear standoff. For 13 days, in October 1962, the world stood on the brink. The Cuban Missile Crisis brought the United States and the Soviet Union closer to nuclear war than ever before. American naval forces established a quarantine around Cuba. Diplomatic messages crossed oceans. Military units prepared for possible conflict. In the end, a negotiated settlement was reached. The Soviets agreed to remove the missiles. The United States pledged not to invade Cuba and quietly agreed to remove American missiles from Turkey. But the shadow of the Bay of Pigs lingered. The failed invasion had shaped the crisis. It had hardened positions and deepened mistrust. For the CIA, Cuba became a lesson in limits. Covert action, which had seemed so effective in Iran and Guatemala, could falter when assumptions proved wrong. The belief that a population would rise spontaneously against a leader, that perception alone could topple a regime, had not held true. Cuba also raised deeper questions. How far should covert operations go? What level of risk was acceptable? And who bore responsibility when secret plans became public failures? For the American people, much of the internal debate remained hidden. Official statements acknowledged mistakes but revealed little of the internal calculations. Over time, congressional investigations in the 1970s would bring more details into the light. The Church Committee examined CIA activities, including plots related to Cuba. The image of an intelligence agency capable of orchestrating global events began to appear more complicated. In Cuba, Fidel Castro remained in power for decades. The island endured economic hardship, political repression, and isolation. It also became a symbol of defiance to some, of authoritarian rule to others. For the United States, the presence of a hostile government so close to home was a constant reminder that not every covert campaign would unfold as planned. Cuba marked a turning point. It demonstrated both the reach of American intelligence and its vulnerability to miscalculation. It showed that secrecy could not guarantee success, and it underscored a truth that would echo through future operations. In the hidden world of intelligence, certainty is rare. Assumptions carry weight, and when they prove mistaken, the consequences can ripple far beyond the original plan. 90 miles from Florida, a small island had altered the trajectory of the Cold War, and the agency would carry the memory of that lesson into every operation that followed. By the early 1960s, American involvement in Vietnam was deepening. What had begun as advisory support to South Vietnam and its struggle against communist forces was steadily evolving into something larger and far more complex. But alongside the uniformed soldiers and the widely reported battles, another war was unfolding. A quieter war, one conducted in villages, jungles, and shadowed offices far from the television cameras. The CIA had been active in Vietnam even before large numbers of American combat troops arrived. Its officers worked to assess political loyalties, gather intelligence on the Viet Cong, and support the fragile government in Saigon. Vietnam was not simply a battlefield. It was a contest for allegiance. In countless rural hamlets, families faced impossible choices. The Viet Cong operated at night, blending into the population. By day, South Vietnamese officials attempted to assert control. Trust was fragile. Fear was constant. American leaders believed that military force alone would not secure victory. The insurgency depended on local networks, informants, couriers, political organizers. To defeat it, those networks would have to be dismantled. Out of that calculation came one of the most controversial CIA-supported programs of the war. It was known as the Phoenix Program. Officially launched in 1967, Phoenix aimed to identify and neutralize the Viet Cong's political infrastructure. Intelligence officers compiled detailed dossiers on suspected operatives. Local informants were recruited. South Vietnamese forces carried out raids and arrests. The word neutralize carried a broad meaning. It could mean capture. It could mean defection. It could also mean death. From Washington's perspective, Phoenix was a necessary measure in an unconventional war. The Viet Cong did not wear uniforms. They did not always fight in open fields. They relied on secrecy and intimidation. Supporters of the program argued that it weakened the insurgency's internal structure. They pointed to numbers, thousands of suspected operatives captured or killed. But the human reality was far more complicated. Vietnam's countryside was a web of personal relationships. Allegiances shifted. Accusations could be driven by fear, rivalry, or misunderstanding. In such an environment, intelligence was rarely perfect. Mistakes were inevitable. Some innocent civilians were caught in the dragnet. Reports of abuse and coercion surfaced. The line between counterinsurgency and repression grew blurred. As the war intensified, so did the scale of operations. CIA officers worked alongside South Vietnamese counterparts, advising and coordinating. Information flowed through field stations and into central databases. Names were cross-checked. Targets were prioritized. Yet even as these efforts expanded, the broader war was not turning decisively in America's favor. The Tet Offensive in 1968 shocked the nation. Though militarily costly for North Vietnamese forces, it demonstrated that the insurgency remained resilient. Television images brought the conflict into American living rooms. Public confidence wavered. Amid growing skepticism, details of covert programs began to draw scrutiny. In the early 1970s, congressional hearings examined aspects of the Phoenix program. Critics argued that it represented an abandonment of American ideals. Supporters insisted it was a grim but necessary tool in a brutal conflict. For the CIA, Vietnam was unlike earlier interventions. Iran and Guatemala had been swift operations with defined objectives. Cuba had been a concentrated episode of failure. Vietnam was prolonged. It was layered. It forced the agency to operate within a vast, grinding war that consumed years and lives. It also tested assumptions about intelligence itself. Could complex social networks truly be mapped and dismantled through files and reports? Could loyalty in a divided country be measured accurately from afar? The answers proved elusive. By the early 1970s, the United States began withdrawing its forces. In 1975, Saigon fell. The war ended with North Vietnam's victory. For many Americans, it was a painful chapter. For the CIA, Vietnam left deep institutional lessons. It underscored the limits of intelligence in shaping political outcomes. It revealed how easily covert programs could become entangled in ethical controversy. And it demonstrated that even vast resources and sophisticated analysis could not guarantee control over events on the ground. In Vietnam's villages, the memory of the conflict endured long after the final helicopters lifted off from Saigon. Families remembered nighttime raids. Informants remembered the risks they took. Survivors carried quiet stories of loss. Back in Washington, policymakers reflected on what had been gained and what had been sacrificed. Vietnam did not end covert operations, but it changed the conversation. It prompted new oversight. It led to reforms within the intelligence community, and it introduced a more cautious tone into discussions of intervention. The war within the war had shown that secrecy could shield actions from public view, but not forever. Eventually, questions would surface, and when they did, the moral weight of those hidden years would be difficult to ignore. Vietnam was not just a battlefield. It was a mirror reflecting the challenges of fighting an invisible enemy in a distant land. And it forced the CIA and the nation it served to confront a difficult truth. In secret wars, victory is not always measured by territory held or enemies captured. Sometimes it is measured by what a nation is willing to become in the process. In December of 1979, the Cold War took a dramatic turn. Soviet troops crossed the border into Afghanistan. For the Kremlin, it was an effort to stabilize a faltering communist government. For Washington, it was something else entirely, a bold expansion of Soviet military power into Southwest Asia. The images were stark. Soviet tanks rolling through mountain passes, paratroopers descending into Kabul, a rugged nation, long resistant to foreign rule, suddenly occupied by one of the world's two superpowers. Inside the White House and at CIA headquarters in Langley, alarm bells rang. Afghanistan bordered Iran and Pakistan. It lay near the Persian Gulf, a region vital to global energy supplies. If the Soviet Union consolidated control there, American strategists feared it would shift the balance of power. President Jimmy Carter authorized a covert response. What followed would become one of the largest and longest covert operations in CIA history. The plan was deceptively simple: support the Afghan resistance. The fighters were known collectively as the Mujahideen, loosely organized groups drawn from tribes and factions across the country. They knew the terrain intimately. They were motivated by faith, nationalism, and a fierce desire to repel foreign occupation. The CIA would not send American soldiers into battle. Instead, it would supply money, weapons, and training, much of it funneled through Pakistan's intelligence service. The operation grew steadily over the years. Under President Ronald Reagan, support expanded dramatically. Advanced weapons were introduced, including shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles known as Stingers. The Stinger missile changed the equation. Soviet helicopters, once dominant in the mountains, became vulnerable. The balance of power shifted in the skies. For the first time, a superpower's modern military machine was being challenged effectively by guerrilla fighters armed with American-supplied weapons. In Washington, the strategy was seen as a success. The Soviet Union was being drawn into a costly, grinding conflict. Casualties mounted. Morale declined. The war became unpopular at home. Some called it the Soviet Union's Vietnam. The CIA's role remained officially unacknowledged, but its fingerprints were evident to those watching closely. Money flowed quietly. Weapons crossed borders under cover of secrecy. Training camps operated beyond public view. Throughout the 1980s, the Afghan war intensified. Villages were bombed. Millions of refugees fled into Pakistan and Iran. The human toll was staggering. And yet, from a geopolitical standpoint, Washington believed the operation was working. In 1989, after nearly a decade of war, Soviet forces withdrew from Afghanistan. 2 years later, the Soviet Union itself collapsed. For many American officials, the Afghan operation symbolized the effectiveness of covert action on a grand scale. A rival superpower had been weakened without a direct U.S. military confrontation. But as with earlier operations, the immediate outcome was only part of the story. Afghanistan did not settle into peace. With the Soviets gone, rival factions turned on one another. Civil war erupted. Warlords competed for control. Kabul was shelled by competing militias. The United States, having achieved its primary objective of countering the Soviet Union, gradually reduced its involvement. Attention shifted elsewhere. Into this vacuum stepped a new force. In the mid-1990s, a movement known as the Taliban emerged from religious schools in Pakistan. Promising order and stability, they captured Kabul in 1996 and established strict rule across much of the country. Afghanistan once again became a place of global consequence. Among those who found refuge there was a Saudi-born militant named Osama bin Laden. He had been among the foreign volunteers who supported the anti-Soviet jihad in the 1980s. Though not directly a CIA asset, he operated in the same broader conflict, drawing strength and experience from the struggle. In the years that followed, his network, Al-Qaeda, would plan attacks against American targets. On September 11, 2001, those plans culminated in tragedy. Nearly 3,000 Americans were killed in coordinated attacks on New York and Washington. In the aftermath, attention returned sharply to Afghanistan. The CIA was once again at the forefront. Within weeks of the attacks, agency officers were on the ground, working with local allies to dismantle the Taliban regime and pursue Al-Qaeda leaders. It was a stark reminder of how interconnected past and present had become. The covert war of the 1980s, once viewed as a strategic triumph, now cast a long shadow. Historians continue to debate the extent to which American support for the Mujahideen contributed to later instability. The situation was complex. Afghanistan's internal divisions predated foreign intervention. Regional dynamics were intricate, but one reality was undeniable. Weapons, training, and militant networks forged in one era did not simply disappear when geopolitical priorities shifted. The Afghan operation illustrated both the power and the peril of covert action. In the short term, it achieved a significant objective. It imposed costs on a rival superpower and contributed to a broader strategic shift. In the long term, it revealed how unintended consequences can emerge from even the most carefully calculated policies. For the CIA, Afghanistan became a study in duration. A conflict that began as a chapter in the Cold War extended into the 21st century. What started as a secret war against Soviet expansion evolved into a global campaign against terrorism. And for the American public, the story was often fragmented. In the 1980s, the Mujahideen were portrayed as freedom fighters resisting occupation. In the early 2000s, Afghanistan became synonymous with terrorism and instability. Between those two narratives lay decades of quiet decisions, shifting alliances, and unintended outcomes. The mountains of Afghanistan have witnessed empires come and go. They have absorbed the ambitions of foreign powers for centuries. For the CIA, the Afghan campaign was both a moment of confidence and a source of reflection. It demonstrated that covert support could alter the course of global events. It also underscored a sobering truth. When nations intervene in distant lands, the consequences do not end when the immediate objective is achieved. They unfold over time, sometimes over generations, and in the hidden history of secret wars, Afghanistan stands as a reminder that victory in one chapter may set the stage for challenges in the next. By the mid-1970s, something unusual began to happen in Washington. For nearly 3 decades, the CIA had operated largely in the shadows. Presidents were briefed. Select members of Congress were informed. But the American public knew very little about the scope of covert operations carried out in their name. Then the silence began to break. In 1974, investigative reporting revealed that the CIA had conducted domestic, surveillance on anti-war activists during the Vietnam era. The disclosures shocked many Americans. The agency, created to gather foreign intelligence, was never intended to operate against U.S. citizens. Questions multiplied. What else had been done in secret? In 1975, the United States Senate established a special committee to investigate intelligence activities. It was chaired by Senator Frank Church of Idaho. The Church Committee hearings were, for many Americans, a revelation. For the first time, details of covert operations, some dating back decades, were discussed publicly. Plots to assassinate foreign leaders, efforts to influence elections overseas, secret programs conducted without broad congressional oversight. Televised hearings brought intelligence officials into open session. Documents were declassified. The phrase "rogue elephant" entered the national vocabulary. For those who had served within the CIA, the moment was deeply unsettling. Many believed their work had protected the nation during its most dangerous years. They had operated under presidential authority. They had acted within a Cold War framework that demanded urgency and discretion. Yet now, the country was asking whether secrecy had gone too far. The result was a fundamental shift. New oversight mechanisms were established. Permanent intelligence committees were created in both the House and the Senate. Executive orders prohibited political assassinations. Legal guidelines were strengthened. The CIA would continue to operate covertly, but the boundaries were more clearly defined, at least on paper. As the Cold War wound down, new challenges emerged. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 marked the end of a long era. The familiar rivalry that had shaped decades of covert action was gone. But intelligence work did not disappear. Instead, the focus shifted. Terrorism, cyber threats, and non-state actors became central concerns. Operations grew more technologically sophisticated. Satellites and signals intelligence complemented human sources. Then came September 11, 2001. In the wake of the attacks, the CIA was granted expanded authorities. The urgency was palpable. Another attack had to be prevented. Covert detention sites were established overseas. Enhanced interrogation techniques were authorized. Drone strikes targeted suspected militants in remote regions. Supporters argued that these measures disrupted terrorist networks and saved lives. Critics raised profound ethical concerns. Again, the pattern emerged. Actions taken in secrecy for national security would eventually come under public scrutiny. In 2014, a Senate report detailed aspects of the post-9/11 detention and interrogation program. The debate was intense. Some defended the program as a difficult necessity in extraordinary times. Others saw it as a departure from American principles. For the CIA, the tension between secrecy and accountability remained constant. Intelligence work, by its nature, cannot be entirely transparent. Sources must be protected. Operations must remain confidential to succeed. And yet, in a democracy, power ultimately rests with the people. That balance between effective secrecy and lawful oversight has defined the agency's modern era. Today, the CIA operates in a world very different from the one it entered in 1947. The threats are diffuse. Adversaries may not wear uniforms or represent formal governments. Information travels instantly across digital networks. But the central dilemma remains unchanged. How does a free society defend itself in a dangerous world without compromising the values it seeks to protect? For many Americans in the generation that lived through the Cold War, the CIA evokes a mixture of respect and unease. Respect for the men and women who served quietly, often at great personal risk. Unease about the consequences of actions carried out beyond public view. The agency's history is neither purely heroic nor purely troubling. It is complex. It includes moments of ingenuity and courage. It also includes misjudgments and unintended consequences. The story of the CIA secret wars is, in many ways, a story about power. The power to influence events across oceans. The power to shape political outcomes. And the power to act without immediate public awareness. But it is also a story about limits. The limits of intelligence in predicting human behavior. The limits of force in reshaping societies. And the limits that a democracy must place on itself, even in times of fear. As we look back across the decades, from Iran and Guatemala to Cuba, Vietnam, and Afghanistan, a pattern becomes visible. Each operation was shaped by its time. Each was justified by the perceived threats of its era. Each left consequences that extended far beyond the original objective. In the end, the CIA secret wars are not just chapters in a classified archive. They are part of the American story, a story of a nation striving to protect itself in an uncertain world. A story of decisions made in quiet rooms under pressure, often with incomplete information, and a story that continues, because as long as there are rivals, conflicts, and unseen dangers, there will be those tasked with confronting them in silence. The shadows remain, but so does the ongoing conversation about how a democracy navigates them. And perhaps that conversation, open, reflective, and at times uncomfortable, is itself a measure of the strength the nation seeks to defend. When most Americans think of the CIA, they picture dramatic moments, covert landings on distant shores, secret meetings in dimly lit rooms, high-stakes operations that alter the course of history. But for every headline-making event, there have been thousands of quieter days spent reading cables, days spent cultivating a single source, days spent analyzing fragments of information that may or may not reveal a coming threat. Behind every covert action stands a community of men and women whose names are rarely known. They are case officers, working overseas under diplomatic cover, analysts seated in secure rooms in Virginia, linguists, scientists, technicians, pilots. They do not wear uniforms. They do not march in parades. And when they succeed, the public may never hear about it. The CIA Memorial Wall stands inside headquarters at Langley. Carved into its marble surface are stars, each one representing an officer who died in the line of duty. Some of those stars are accompanied by names. Others are not, even in death. Certain identities remain classified. It is a stark reminder that intelligence work carries real risk. During the Cold War, CI officers operated in cities divided by ideology: Berlin, Moscow, Havana. They recruited sources who risked imprisonment or execution if discovered. Meetings were arranged with coded signals and carefully timed walks. a brush pass on a crowded street, a package left beneath a park bench, a coded message hidden within an ordinary letter dot in many cases. The most important, victories were invisible, a missile deployment, detected early enough to prevent surprise, a diplomatic breakthrough, made possible by accurate intelligence, a terrorist plot disrupted. Before it could unfold, these successes do not lend themselves to dramatic storytelling. They are measured not by spectacle, but by absence, the absence of catastrophe. Over time, the nature of intelligence has evolved. Technology now plays a central role. Satellites orbit overhead. Cyber units monitor digital networks. Algorithms assist in sorting massive amounts of data, yet human intelligence, the careful cultivation of trust between individuals, remains at the heart of the agency's mission. No satellite can fully replace a well-placed source. No computer can completely interpret the subtleties of human intention. In recent decades, CIA officers have operated in some of the most dangerous regions in the world, tracking terrorist networks, monitoring weapons proliferation, assessing emerging threats. After the attacks of September 11, 2001, agency personnel were among the first Americans on the ground in Afghanistan. They worked alongside local allies, often in rugged terrain, coordinating efforts that would shape the early stages of the conflict. Their work was not glamorous. It was patient, relentless, often lonely. Intelligence officers spend long stretches away from home. Families carry the weight of secrecy. Conversations at the dinner table must remain guarded. For many who serve, the calling is not fame or recognition. It is a belief that their work, though unseen, contributes to national security. And yet, the quiet professionalism of intelligence work exists alongside public controversy. Every era has brought new debates about the boundaries of secrecy. Drone operations, cyber activities, surveillance authorities. Each time, the agency finds itself balancing two imperatives: protect the nation. And uphold the laws and values of the nation. For the officers themselves, these tensions are not abstract. They are personal. Decisions made in Washington shape actions taken in the field. Policies shift. Authorities expand or contract. But the individual case officer still must sit across from a source in a foreign city and decide whether the information offered is reliable. The analyst still must weigh conflicting reports and recommend a course of action that could influence presidential decisions. In those moments, there is no soundtrack, no applause. Only judgment, only responsibility. And often uncertainty. The CIA's history of secret wars has cast a long shadow. Iran, Guatemala, Cuba, Vietnam, Afghanistan. But beneath those sweeping narratives are thousands of individual stories of caution, of courage, of human complexity. Not every operation has been bold or controversial. Some have prevented conflicts from escalating. Some have helped negotiate peace. Some have quietly safeguarded American lives in ways that can never be fully described. The agency has changed over the decades. Oversight is more robust. Legal frameworks are clearer. Congressional committees regularly review intelligence activities, and yet the fundamental nature of intelligence work remains that it operates in ambiguity, that it deals in probabilities rather than certainties, that it often requires acting before all the facts are known. For an American audience that has lived through the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the shock of September 11th, and the ongoing challenges of a turbulent world, the CIA story is interwoven with the nation's own. There have been moments of keep and moments of pride. There have been moments of regret, but always there has been the quiet presence of professionals working behind the scenes. In the end, secret wars are not only about governments and policies. They are about people who make decisions under pressure, people who carry classified knowledge in silence, people whose successes may never be celebrated, and whose failures may be debated for decades. As new threats emerge in a changing world, the need for intelligence does not fade. The shadows remain part of the landscape, and within those shadows, the quiet professionals continue their work, measured not by headlines, but by the steady, often unseen effort to keep the nation secure. It is a calling that asks much, and reveals very little, yet its influence, for better or worse, has shaped the course of modern history. And it will continue to do so long after the cameras have turned away.